Good morning, restaurant owners. Welcome to this week's live Facebook training on how to understand and use your accounting and finance to make better decisions and improve your profits and cash flow. Let me share my screen and we will get on to this week's topic. And that isn't it. There we go. Excuse me. Engineering your menu for profit, the tactical playbook. And what we're talking about here is not graphics, engineering your menu with graphics and placing items in certain places on the menu. There's plenty of advice and help on that out there on the internet or with your other advisors. What we're talking about today is how to financially engineer your menu to drive more profit and cash flow to the bottom line. So we're going to walk you through some proven tactics to maximize profitability while maintaining quality and reveal how little small changes in your menu can dramatically impact your bottom line. So the problem is that you're selling a ton of food, but your bank account or your bottom line profit doesn't reflect it because profit isn't baked into your menu. So over the next 20 minutes, you're going to learn how to use recipe costing with precision techniques. That's where the heavy lifting is on your side. Recipe costing, detailed recipe costing. Nothing happens in engineering your menu to improve profits and cash flow without recipe costing. That is the foundation to the entire presentation and your entire ability to make minor changes in your food costs or in your portion control to enhance profit and cash flow from your menu. We're going to get into contribution margin analysis. What's the difference between the contribution margin and the gross profit? And how does that impact your cash flow? Menu mix optimization. This is a detailed spreadsheet that helps you analyze what your best sellers are compared to your worst sellers and which ones have the best margin, contribution margin, and how you can manipulate that to improve profits and cash flow. And then portion control, how important that is and how minor changes in portion control can significantly impact the bottom line. Okay, let's get into the foundation, recipe costing. In old school analog world, recipe costing cards, where your recipe for every item on your menu was written on a card and the details were there. In today's world, we want to use either Excel or specialized tools like Margin Edge. Margin Edge works really well if you're one or two locations. If you're a multi-location operator with maybe 8, 9, or 10, then maybe you can step up a little bit to Extra Chef, a little more expensive. The point is, we want to digitize your detailed recipe costing so that you can track it with ease. The next most important step is batch recipe costing. So a gallon of soup, 3 pounds of meat rub, a full tray of lasagna. You want to start with those batch recipes, whether it's salad dressing, like we said, soup, or a full tray of lasagna. What is the cost of that entire batch? And then when batch costing, divide that batch into the yielded number of servings to get an accurate per portion cost. Then you for each recipe, for each menu item, you start with that batch per portion cost, and then you build in the other detailed cost ingredients into that recipe. Weighted averages. When fluctuating ingredients costs, use weighted averages. So here's an example where you have 3 pounds at $3 at 20 pounds, 3.40 at 40 pounds, 3.20 at, let me get my cursor over here, 3.20 at 30 pounds. The weighted average is $3.24 a pound. Put it in a spreadsheet, keep track of that weighted average. Now, if you're using Margin Edge or Extra Chef, and they're pulling the detail line cost out of every single supplier invoice, supplier bill, it will automatically calculate those weighted averages into your detailed recipe costing formulas. So that's the foundation. It takes a long time to develop those detailed recipe costing formulas. If you haven't done it already, you got to involve your chefs and you have to pay attention to the details. Every single item counts, even if it's a small portion of seasoning. Contribution margin, the real profit metric. So the contribution margin formula is the menu price minus the recipe cost. Now, each of these is going to build on the prior concept to get to the real magic of menu engineering. So your menu price minus the detailed recipe cost, which we just talked about measuring back here for every single item on your menu, that is your contribution margin. It's the dollar that every item contributes to your bottom line. And that's what pays your bills, not just percentages. So I'm just going to read this highlighted box here because it gets a little complicated. There is some minutia difference between food cost percentage and contribution margin. Both are important. Food cost percentage indicates the efficiency in managing ingredient costs. That gets into managing waste, managing your orders, managing your par values to avoid waste, and avoiding waste in the operations of your kitchen and even the front of house. And that goes back to one of the concepts that we've talked about in prior trainings, and that is the waste tracker that helps you and your team pinpoint where the waste is occurring and manage that and improve your margins. However, the contribution margin provides a more direct measure of the revenue each dish brings to cover overhead and contribute to the bottom line. Food cost percentages is an important metric to track when analyzing financial statements and tracking and measuring waste and your ability to eliminate waste. Contribution margin is used to engineer your menu to higher dollar volume and a higher dollar bottom line. So I hope that makes sense. There is some nuance there between food cost percentage and contribution margin. When we're looking at improving your menu profitability, we're dealing in contribution margin. When we're looking at your overall financial statements, we're looking at food cost percentages. All right, the menu mix and the total contribution margin analysis. That's the key here. Total contribution margin for each and every single line item in your menu. That is the total contribution margin per item times the number sold over any period of time. That can be per day, per week. We usually kind of break it down per week or even for the month. So 300 burgers at a $5 contribution margin equals a $1,500 total contribution versus 75 steaks at a $12 contribution margin equals a $900 total contribution. Those should both say total contribution. So 300 burgers is generating $1,500 to your bottom line, while only 75 steaks is generating $900 to your bottom line. So you want to plot your menu items. This is a quadrant analysis. Plot your menu items by contribution margin. And we're going to look at an example here. So you can identify your stars. Your stars are your high contribution margin at high volume. Your puzzles are a high contribution margin, but low volume. It's a puzzle because you figured out the contribution margin. It's a high margin. What can we do to generate more volume on that item? And then you have your workhorses, low contribution margin at high volume. Sometimes you have to have those on your menu, and that might be the salads or an appetizer. And then you have your dogs, low contribution margin at low volume. So what are the strategic actions? Promote high contribution margins with better menu placement. Your stars, you probably want to leave them alone. Your puzzles, you want to figure out how you can place them on the menu to get better exposure, or maybe the next item here is more important. Train your servers to suggest some of those high contribution margins that are coming in at a low volume, those items. Consider repricing some of your workhorses to get a little more margin out of them. Even just minor changes in the pricing can drive pretty big increases in bottom line profit. And then you want to remove or replace the dogs that don't perform. Focus your efforts on shifting sales toward items that contribute more dollars per transaction. So let's look at an example. Let me bring this over. And I'm going to hide those columns real quick. And let's just look at, let's pull this out of the way. So every entree item, you have an amount sold, you have a menu price, you have a food cost, you have a food cost percentage. Ignore the amount sold, although that is the most important key here in just a bit. So food cost, food price minus food cost, that gives you your gross profit percentage and your contribution margin. Now, these color coding, your stars are green, workhorses are yellow, your dogs are red, the puzzles are orange. At first glance, this menu item number 2 might look like a puzzle, but it has a high number of sold. So let's unhide the columns. And you can see line item number 2, when we look at total contribution margin, again, that should say total here, and total percentage, it turns into a workhorse instead of being a puzzle. This line item number 3, which looked like a workhorse, turns into a puzzle when you factor in the total volume, amount sold, the total food cost, and the total contribution margin over a period of time. So I hope that makes sense. And then you put them in this quadrant, and then you can start to analyze your stars you don't probably want to do anything with, your workhorses. Maybe you can manipulate the food cost a little bit or raise the price slightly to turn it into more of a star or closer to a star. And your puzzles, you want to figure out how to sell more of those that are a high contribution margin, but a low volume, a low quantity sold. Once you look at this over a period and you're factoring in every single menu item, then you can start to play with your pricing, anything that you can do to drive the food cost down on workhorses and stars and puzzles, and start to filter out the dogs that aren't selling and don't drive a huge contribution margin anyway. And you'll see that those minor changes can drive huge dollars to your total contribution margin for a period of time. So it's not simple. It's actually very simple. It's not easy. What's difficult is making sure you've got your accurate food cost for every menu item on the menu and tracking everything and building this spreadsheet so you can start to see how to manipulate your pricing and your cost to drive more contribution margin or dollars to your bottom line. Okay, portion control. The next most important thing is having discipline on your portion control. Oversized portion inflate food costs, inconsistency damages customer experience, and lost margin compounds over thousands of dishes. Let me give you an example. Just a 10% overportion on a dish with a 30% food cost becomes a 33% food cost, eroding your profit margin by 3 percentage points on every single plate. 3 percentage points might not sound like much, but when you compound that over thousands of dishes, and when you start to look at that on the 3% change in the contribution margin, it can be a huge amount of lost dollars. So you want to incorporate the right tools to start to execute on the discipline of portion control, physical tools, digital scales, portion scoops, portion bags, pre-portion containers, process tools, line checks, pre-shift meetings, plate waste tracking, people tools. Train the why behind portion control, not just the how. Successful execution requires both tools and culture. Your team needs to understand how portions impact the restaurant's financial health. When they're cooperating with you in a team environment to improve the restaurant's financial health, they're improving their future prospects as well by having long-term prospects with your restaurant. Okay, let's recap. Measure to manage. You can't manage what you don't measure. We talked about the foundation being detailed recipe costing. This precise recipe costing is non-negotiable in achieving your ideal profit levels. Precise is the word to take away from this. Being as precise as possible with your batch recipes. And when you're precise with your costing, you also need to be very precise with your portion control. Otherwise, all that work on managing the costing and the recipe and tracking all of that through apps like Margin Edge goes right out the window when you don't have discipline on your portion control. And then remember, we talked about the contribution margin that tells the real profit story of dollars contributed to the bottom line, not just percentages, which is more of a financial statement analysis and metric. And then we unlock the total profit here with the menu mix. We looked at our diagram, and this is a very simple example looking at 5 items over the course of probably just a day or a couple days. You want to lay this entire spreadsheet out for your entire menu and also start to break it down by categories on your menu: appetizers, salads, main dishes, desserts, entrees, so that you can analyze within each division of your menu and identify the stars, the workhorses, the dogs, and the puzzles within each division of your menu. So that mix analysis unlocks the hidden menu profitability by identifying your true stars and analyze the impact of small changes in your costing and small changes in your pricing on the menu. And this also goes back to one of the concepts we've talked about. You can't have a static menu. You can't have the old, heavy cardboard or other type of material menu that doesn't change, but maybe once or twice a year. Your menu pricing needs to be more flexible and maybe even live and digital so that you can make pricing changes on a monthly or even more frequently than that when you're using these new tools like Margin Edge that track instantly when your costing changes, when your ingredient costs change up or down, so that you can make sure you're on top of your menu pricing on a consistent daily basis. Okay, that's it for today. If you're not seeing a minimum of 65% gross profit from your food sales, we need to talk. 65% would be a minimum gross profit, and that's on your food costs and your beer, liquor, wine costs as well, and non-alcoholic beverage. That doesn't factor in labor. We're just talking about the product cost and the margin from the product cost. If you're not getting those levels, and it should be closer than 30% for most restaurants, some of our clients are achieving a 25 to 28% food cost, so a 75 to 72% gross profit. And that might sound like much, but those small percentages add huge dollars to the bottom line. So grab a profit and cash flow analysis meeting with me. We'll examine your current systems, identify your biggest opportunities, and map a plan for more profit. Most restaurants, if you're an independently owned restaurant and your location or each of your locations is achieving $1.5 million or above in annual sales, we can easily add 25,000 to 100,000 to your bottom line in hidden gains. Check the comment box below this video. I'll leave a link to my calendar, and we'll see you next week for another live Facebook on how to use your accounting and finance to make better decisions and improve your profits and cash flow. Have a great week.